We were going to do a mailbag today. It was going to be kind of a end of season pre-Super Bowl wind down mailbag. And the NFL coaching cycle said, "F you."
Very loudly and aggressively.
That's exactly what happened. And so there's just so much coaching news to dig through. And you guys hit some of it on the postmortem show, but like 20 things have happened.
I wanted to do more, but I just knew that within 48 hours, we would be under an avalanche of more news, which is exactly what happened.
So we're going to try our best today to scoop up everything that has happened. We're recording this at 2:09 p.m. Central Time on Thursday. I make no promises about anything that happens after this as it relates to the Cardinals or the Raiders or any assistants that are going to get hired while we're recording this thing.
I'm so excited to dig into this with y'all. I wore my best Matt LaFleur, Kevin O'Connell, Mike Vrabel outfit. That's only useful if you're watching, but I got the puffy vest, I got the hoodie. I'm ready to talk coaching.
You are a man that has worked in an NFL building before and understands the general vibe for most of the people who and what they wear in that situation.
Can you actually wait? Which coach do you most associate with the vest? For me, it's actually Brian Flores. Like the Brian Flores vest is
Flores
really
loves the puffy
he rocks
vest.
it,
That's
man.
right.
I think it's LaFleur all the way. Like he is almost always wearing some sort of vest. But yeah, Flores is a good shout. Vrabel does it a lot. It's in vogue right now. And yes, like inside the building. I mean, if you have a wardrobe in your office when you get to work and all you have to do is send it downstairs to get washed, like why would you ever wear anything else? It's amazing.
It's the Jim Harbaugh School of Fashion. We have a couple of these hires or non-hires that we're pushing off to later in the show because I actually wanted to talk to people who know more than we do about these things. And so the Joe Brady hire with the Bills, I feel like is such a strange endpoint to what has been a strange couple weeks for the Bills. And not even like shitting on it, just landing on Joe Brady at the end of what was kind of a strange set of decisions from Buffalo. I just wanted to talk through that with somebody who understands that franchise. Joe Buscaglia came on. We talked about it for like 20 minutes, just trying to figure out what this all means, where the Bills are going to go. And then the Eagles offensive coordinator search, I think, is a layered discussion, to say the least. And so Zach Berman joined us after that Joe Buscaglia conversation to just chat about where the Eagles offensive coordinator situation is, why it's taken so long, why some of these guys might have passed on the job. So that is the reason that the three of us will not hit either of those decisions or searches in the course of the show. So let's dig into the things we are going to talk about today. And let's begin with the Cleveland Browns hiring Todd Monken to be their offensive coordinator. The Cleveland Browns hiring Todd Monken to be their head coach, which is a different thing.
One level up.
Dave, your response, your initial reaction when you saw that the Browns had landed on Todd Monken.
Surprise, mainly because it sounded like if you were trying to read the tea leaves and connect the dots, it sounded like it was going to be Nate Shieldhouse. Like all the reporting, Diana Rossini. I think we mentioned it on the Hangover show that the Browns flew out to L.A. to talk to Nate Shieldhouse right after the Rams got back from Seattle. And if you're doing all that's a full court press. That's like we're going to get him in a room and we're not going to let him leave. It's felt very much like they had their guy. And so when I heard it was Todd Monken, I was like, well, A, that's not Nate Shieldhouse, and B, it's the opposite sort of hire in the sense of like experience, age, history with the organization, history calling plays. Not to say that it's good or bad, but it just felt like, other than the fact that they're both offensive-minded head coaches, it just felt like a very big veer away from the guy that looked like he was going to get the job on Monday morning.
There's a lot to sort through here, right? I mean, we've heard all about, I think it was Tom Pelissero was talking about just some of the details associated with this search, what some of the candidates had to do, the fact that it felt very corporate, like in the way that they were going about this, like having to fill out a personality test and having to write an essay. And the Browns kind of do operate this way sometimes, where I think they want to fancy themselves as like a Fortune 500 company. And I think there are some benefits to that, but also some drawbacks because this is not a normal working environment. And so the idea that they were trying, that Shieldhouse and Todd Monken were kind of in at the end, I think speaks to how unattractive this job was to some other people. We had many people pull their names out of this job search, Grant Udinski being one of them. And so it did feel like there were some hesitations from some of these candidates about taking this job. And I think that may have extended to Nate Shieldhouse. And I don't know what those were. At the end of the day, what is the reason somebody like Nate Shieldhouse doesn't want a job like this? Is it the idea that you're going to get married to Jim Schwartz, like that's what we want to do? Is it the state of the roster? Is it the fact that maybe there will be another job that comes available in the next couple of years that's better than this one? I don't know. But I think justifiably there were a lot of concerns, Derrik, with some of the candidates about what it would mean to take this job. And so that's why landing on somebody like Todd Monken, who maybe didn't have like a voracious interest from a lot of other places, makes sense at the end of all of this.
And if I'm Shieldhouse, that's what it is for me, right? Like, you're incredibly young. You're already getting hype as far as like the head coaching stuff goes. Why would you want to attach yourself to a Browns organization that, when you're taking a head coaching job, most of these teams are going to have to go through like a couple of years of rebuild. But like the Browns have a very far way to go with this roster. You have zero answer at quarterback and probably don't have a good avenue there. Like, I understand why he would want to back off of that. To me, it's like, it's the whole process of it all. Like, you mentioned all the weird stuff that I think that they were asking a lot of their coaching interviews to do in terms of just all the stuff to potentially take the job. And so partly because of that, it seemed a lot of guys turned that down. Shieldhouse ends up turning it down. And then it also seemed like for a little bit, like maybe they were just going to internally promote Jim Schwartz, who I'm assuming wouldn't need to do all that stuff because he's already been in the building and they know what the deal is with him. And then it ends up being Todd Monken, who I think was a little bit off the radar, and also a weird one because he'd been their offensive coordinator like 4 or 5 years ago and then moves on from that job, obviously goes to the college ranks a little bit. Now he's back as a head coach, which that one I think is just like a weird kind of dynamic. There's so much about their process of it all. It's kind of been confusing to me, even if I think Monken is like maybe not the sexiest hire, but probably fine if you're trying to get a little bit of offensive juice going while you're trying to rebuild this roster a little bit.
My thought is, if you are compelling some of the candidates to keep Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator, and that's limiting your pool of people, what is stopping you from just making Jim Schwartz the head coach?
That's what makes this strange. Is it seems, again, reading tea leaves, it seems like Jim Schwartz was a package deal that scared a lot of guys out of this, and then Todd Monken is the one where that's okay. Or maybe they thought Jim Schwartz would stay on to work with Todd Monken,
but then he didn't.
And then Jim Schwartz was like, "No, screw you."
That's the fact that you're trying to pair him together with some of these coaches, and then now he's potentially going to leave anyway. I understand that there's a lot of drama associated with this. My read on this, and I've said this before, this feels to me like a couple of the coaching hires that the Texans made in the pre-DeMeco Ryans era of the Texans, where the through line there is that the Texans had Deshaun Watson on the roster. This team is dealing with the downfall of having Deshaun Watson on the roster. And the Texans hired, they had the Lovie Smith and David Culley years back to back. This feels like something like that, where Todd Monken is potentially going to be like your head coach for the next 2 years as you rebuild this thing. Todd Monken turns 60 in like 6 days. He's going to get, I don't know, $25 million on this contract. He's going to get fired at the end of 2 years. He's got a nice little retirement plan. And then you go about hiring the coach you really want to take you into the next era. That may seem cynical, and I do think that's probably a pessimistic outlook on what this is, but just from the outside looking in, that's what it feels like to me.
Well, and again, with where the Browns are in terms of how far the roster has to go, you're still dealing with some of the Deshaun Watson stuff. And there were other attractive jobs on the market for other good coaches to take, like John Harbaugh and all that stuff. It felt like they got into the game a little bit late in terms of trying to pick who their head coach was going to be. And given all the constraints with the roster and them trying to tie people to Jim Schwartz and then not doing it, which that I think is also a weird dynamic because I think Jim Schwartz is a great coach. So I wonder what the hang up was with some of the head coaching candidates. All of the process to me was just kind of very bizarre here.
I asked this earnestly, and I guess if I was playing devil's advocate, for the record, I felt that way about the Browns job before they ever made a hire. So it's nothing personal about Todd Monken.
Yeah, I actually think I like Todd Monken, and I'm actually curious to see what Todd Monken can do.
So that's what I was about to say is it seems for all the world like whoever took this job was going to be set up to fail or set up to be replaced by a coach entering into a more favorable position in a couple of years. It's strange to me that outside of the fact that the process was weird and the Browns have a long track record of dysfunction, I feel like more people would be interested in Todd Monken for the simple virtue of the fact that he arrived in Baltimore and Lamar Jackson's best football coincided with the time that he was calling the plays for the Ravens. And the fact that that is not more interesting or more excited, is it purely related to his age?
Yes.
Yeah. And
I think personality. I think age and personality. I think those are the two things that would not make Todd Monken a more attractive head coaching candidate. To me, when we're thinking about what is the best path forward here, what is the best way this can work out for the Browns, it's easy. He's Bruce Arians.
What a great comp. That's really good.
That's it. And Bruce was 60 when he got that job in Arizona.
That's an exciting comp, though.
That's the best case scenario, is that he's Bruce Arians. And so, and I like Todd Monken. I do see a path like that forward. But I think Bruce was 60 when he got that job. And I know you've heard Bruce Arians talk. We talk about like guys that were career assistants that maybe are a little rougher around the edges than the McVay clone factory that we've watched over the last 5 to 10 years. I think they fall into similar categories.
That makes me so much more interested to watch this. I do. At the end of the day, I think the environment, the roster that the Browns have right now is going to make this tough. But outside of the strange process, I think I'm a little more interested in this than the public opinion would have you believe.
2 downstream effects of this. 1, what happens with Jim Schwartz now? He is under contract. He clearly does not want to be there. I would doubt that the Browns would strong arm him into staying. I think that he could provide a compelling enough case where he's like, I don't want to be here. Please let me out of this deal. And they did this with Kyle Shanahan 10 years ago, right? Like this is the first time the organizations had to deal with something like this. I think he's going to be in demand as a defensive coordinator. I feel like the best spot for him as I look at the spots available still on the board, I would much rather have Jim Schwartz than Gus Bradley if I were the Niners. Mm-hmm. Like that's just the one that makes the most sense. You think about the shared DNA.
And like, how much shit has Jim Schwartz's defense given Kyle Shanahan over the years? Like, just get him on your team and get him out of the way.
I mean, Chris Urich they legitimately share like shared DNA in terms of like how they want to play defense. I mean, if you want to trace the whole thing, which we don't have to get all the way into, Stefanski wanted that defensive system in part because of what Saleh and the Niners did to him in the 2019 playoffs. And so, or during the 2019 season, I think they played in the playoffs. So that it was scary enough. It's like, I want that. And so they tried to seek that out. Eventually, they had like a diet version of it with Joe Woods, and then they got like the real version of it with Jim Schwartz, even though it was a little bit more man heavy. And so there is like a ton of shared DNA between what the Niners have been in the Saleh era and what Jim Schwartz wants to be, especially up front. The coverages are a little bit different, but I think that is a pretty easy 1-for-1 thing. And so if I'm a Niners fan, I think that is the end result that I would be seeking out, is he is the defensive coordinator of your team next year.
It's just so strange to me that Schwartz was a big enough part of this that it seems like he scared off multiple candidates. He had some expectation that he had a shot to get this job if some other candidates didn't want it. He's been in the building for 3 years, and the Browns, or he seemed to be kind of surprised by this to the point where he's very upset and reportedly left the building. And I don't know, I would have just expected more synergy here than for him to be thrown off by the decision to hire Monken and the Browns seemingly like, well, wait a second, you don't want to work here anymore? Like, why is this surprising to anybody? But yeah, if the Browns are willing to let him leave, damn near anyone with a DC opening should want him, and the Niners make a ton of sense.
The other job that now becomes intriguing, what happens with the Giants offensive coordinator? Because the thought would be that Monken would follow John Harbaugh to the Giants, which I think was part of the reason I was as bullish as I was on the John Harbaugh hire. Now, we don't know who the offensive coordinator for the Giants is going to be. Davis Webb is somebody they've requested. Like, I feel like, he's somebody that's still floating out there. It feels like with the Broncos firing Joe Lombardi, Davis Webb might just be the offensive coordinator for the Broncos. The rumor was that Joe Brady potentially was going to take that job and then take over play calling with Sean Payton. Is that something he would give Davis Webb? If that's the case, would he rather keep the Broncos job? And so now it just becomes a little bit messier for who the Giants offensive coordinator is going to be, and we'll keep an eye on that. Derrik, I don't know if we've talked about this at all, but the Giants defensive coordinator is your guy, Dennard Wilson.
I'm big time into that, man. Like that. I think going back and trying to I think anytime there's like a super successful head coach like Mike Macdonald, people want to go and immediately pick from his like tree from like what might maybe the Seahawks staff. But like all the guys on that Ravens staff like 2-3 years ago, like I think a lot of those guys have been great. Like Weaver is a guy who's getting a lot of interviews as well. Like I think Dennard Wilson and what he was able to do with that defense in Tennessee, like they played hard as hell, man, and they were kind of strapped with a lot of the talent that they had in the secondary. And funny enough, that's actually pretty true of the Giants as well. I think they probably need to retool that room as well, but he's used to making it work with like a really good front and a secondary that's a little bit up and down. So I don't know. I'm excited about that one.
The Titans front was not really good. The Titans had no edge rushers during Dennard Wilson's entire time with the team.
Okay, but
Jeffrey Simmons will do a lot for
their
you, though.
D line is, their interior is awesome. And I thought their linebackers played pretty well this year, actually.
But in terms of just pure pass rush,
yeah, in terms of pure pass rush,
it's no edge rushers to a team that has Abdul Carter and Brian Burns.
That part is different. I just mean having like something in the cupboard up front.
Yes, I think this is a different collection of talent along the defensive front when you can consider all 4 guys for Dennard Wilson. I am excited to watch that.
That's a classic case of a hire where if you go look at the basic stats, the advanced stats, you're probably not going to get very excited. But if you watch some of the stuff the Titans have done over the last 2 years, and then you say, all right, the front's awesome, and Wilson's been making do with not a lot on the back 7 across multiple years, and the Titans are functional at least. I think there's so much reason for optimism there if you have a group that could rush the passer like that, plus an offseason to, you would think, upgrade the secondary.
It also feels to me, and this is based on no knowledge of the situation or the dynamics, but they didn't promote Dennard Wilson to be the head coach after Mike Macdonald left. And the fact that John Harbaugh sought him out here instead of somebody that was on that Ravens staff almost feels like we might have screwed up. And I'm trying to rectify that here. So speaking of the Ravens, you guys talked about Jesse Minter on Monday. We don't have to rehash a ton of that. Just my overall thoughts on it, in favor. Right. I mean, this is as soon as they fired John Harbaugh, I was like, this is the one that to me makes the most sense. And I think it makes the most sense in part because if I'm trying to optimize my coaching staff and my identity as a franchise with a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, I think those are the moments where going with a defensive-minded head coach makes sense because you already have an element on your offense that's going to probably put you in the top 10 even with an average offensive coordinator. Making sure you're doing everything you can to get the most out of the defensive side of the ball when you have an MVP caliber quarterback, I support that as an idea. And obviously Jesse Minter has done a phenomenal job with the Chargers. Like a phenomenal job.
It was so good. And because we talked about it again after his first year, I was like, I want to see a little bit of growth from him. And I think he did that. Like, I think he developed a lot of some of what he was spinning behind a lot of his pressures and like how he was bringing some of his pressures. I think almost every player on that defense was the best versions of themselves consistently. And I think that's going to be an important thing because we talk so much about X's and O's, but it's also like, can you just get guys to play at their highest level? And I think that that's important. And then I know he's still got a lot to go in terms of like piecing his staff together. But to me, going out and getting Dwayne Ledford as your offensive line coach, who I think has done a kick-ass job for the Falcons for the past 4 or 5 years, one, like he's been really, really good, but also two, I think it signals like, okay, maybe we're going to be more of a zone-based offensive line team, which is what the Falcons had always been under his tutelage. And so I actually think that's perfect for trying to get the most out of whatever the last year or two of Derrick Henry are going to be. Like, I think the way that this is coming together for the Ravens is like, I'm extremely in favor of all this.
The one that got me really excited is his DB's coach.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you obviously understand that world a lot more than we do.
I mean, Mike Mickens, which I'm not going to lie and say I've been hip to his career this entire time, but just look
You've watched Notre Dame play.
Yes, exactly. He's coming from a DB factory. Mike Mickens is the new DB coach in Baltimore. He overlapped with Kyle Hamilton. He coached Benjamin Morrison and Jacob Parrish this past year. He coached Xavier Watts. It goes back to Julian Love. And on top of that, he was at Cincinnati when Sauce Gardner was there. So a long track record of working and developing with not just, I mean, Sauce Gardner and Kyle Hamilton, unicorn type top 10 prospects, but even guys further down the line. I mean, Xavier Watts and Jacob Parrish have been two of the best rookie DBs in the league this year. So to add that guy, and then obviously Minter was in the college game, so he's deeply familiar with guys that work at that level. To identify him so quickly and bring him on, and again, he's worked with Kyle Hamilton before. I saw that and was very intrigued and excited.
Yeah, the Ledford thing obviously jumped out to me. I think the only reason he doesn't stay in Atlanta is because Bill Callahan is coming with Stefanski. In almost any other scenario, he'd probably still be the Falcons offensive line coach. And so to get him at the end of this, I think is huge for the Ravens. I'm with you on the zone running thing too, Derrik. And I think that their personnel honestly fits that, especially if you bring Linderbaum back. Like they're not like, Falwele, but other than that, like this isn't a group of like huge, massive hulking offensive linemen. And so I think that they could easily kind of slot into that. The biggest question for me is going to be who the offensive coordinator is going to be. So far, a couple names that they've interviewed, they've looked at. Declan Doyle has been requested, who's Bears offensive coordinator. Scotty Montgomery, who was on the Lions staff. Kliff Kingsbury seems to be in the mix there. Derrik, is there anybody you've seen, any names you've seen attached to this job that you would like to see work with Lamar Jackson? I know that you have like a deep emotional investment in whoever ends up getting this thing, and so I wanted to ask you first.
Kliff seems like the easy, just like C+, get a passing grade type of hire. I think I would be more interested in trying to pick somebody like a Scotty Montgomery, like trying to pick somebody from a line staff that I think has had a lot of success over the last handful of years. So I think given the pool of candidates that's left, there's nobody I'm like super excited about. But again, I actually, when me and Dave were talking about this a little bit in terms of trying to pair an offensive coordinator together with Lamar Jackson, I was like, listen, the offensive coordinator hire matters, but to me, just fix the offensive line. And I think a lot of whatever you want from Lamar Jackson is going to kind of fall in line. Them getting Ledford, maybe they make one upgrade. That to me, I'll be happy, I think.
And then Davis Webb, according to reports, seems to be the other one that is in the mix there, which he feels like he's been tapped or looked at for all of these jobs. And if you're Davis Webb and you want to be a head coach next year, I think that coaching Lamar Jackson is probably the best offensive coordinator job on the board, including the Giants one. Let's get to our next one here. You guys also hit this on Monday, but there's been some news about the staff. The Pittsburgh Steelers hire Mike McCarthy to be their head coach. His staff is getting filled out. Again, my just general thoughts on the McCarthy hire. I used a word immediately after it happened. I stand by it. I think it's just deeply underwhelming. I think it's uninspired. And part of the reason that I still believe that a week later is that you look at the offensive staff that he's putting together, he's just getting the Packers band back together. It seems like Scott Tolzien is potentially going to come in as his offensive coordinator. James Campen is going to be his offensive line coach, who was his offensive line coach in Green Bay for several years. I think that Mike McCarthy will potentially do a fine job as the Steelers head coach. But the idea that you're this franchise that had like a 10-7, very compressed distance between your ceiling and floor every single year, and you're getting bounced in the wild card round. Hiring Mike McCarthy to get you out of that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I watched what happened to Mike McCarthy. The offenses have been pretty good, right? But I watched what happened between his last year in Dallas and then what the Dallas offense looked like this year. It was better this year. Like the offense was better when they brought in Clayton Adams and Brian Schottenheimer to run the offense. And so this version of what you're getting with Mike McCarthy, I just find it deeply unexciting. And this was a franchise that had such an opportunity to not do the safe thing, to not retreat back into like the warm embrace of let's just be a competent team with a coach that we kind of know what he is. And there's value in a coach that can win you 9 or 10 games a year. But I still think that this was a chance for them to seek out a different sort of ceiling. Is there a chance that Brian Flores would have been a worse head coach than Mike McCarthy? Yes. But I think I'd explore that uncertainty before I would go back to somebody like Mike McCarthy.
You know what's funny? Derrik and I talked about it at length. I would have done something else. I would have opted for a younger coach with the chance to tap a higher ceiling. I like the moves that are happening with Pittsburgh so far.
Patrick Graham is exciting.
Patrick Graham is exciting, but I feel differently about the Scott Tolzien hire than you do for a couple reasons. Actually, one big reason, and his name is Kellen Moore. Scott Tolzien started in Dallas when McCarthy got that job. He came over from Green Bay. He coached in Dallas for the entirety of the time that Mike was there. He lands in New Orleans this year as the quarterback's coach. And you don't want to assign too much of the credit or too much of the blame, but Coach Tyler Shough on the way to a very promising, very encouraging season from him. And also the fact that Kellen Moore goes to Philly for a year, gets a New Orleans job, builds his own staff, and identifies Tolzien as a guy like, I want to bring him here. And again, Kellen Moore won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. He's had a top 5 offense most of the time he's been a coach. For Kellen Moore to identify him and be part of fast-tracking him the way that Kellen Moore was fast-tracked, I look at that and I say, ooh, I trust if Kellen Moore thinks this guy's got some juice. And I also remember Mike McCarthy sent Kellen Moore away at the end of his Dallas tenure. And for him to be looking at Scott Tolzien as a potential guy to come in, maybe sort of, again, like you mentioned with John Harbaugh, like, ooh, let's get some of that back. I'm kind of intrigued by that. And again, who's the quarterback? What does this look like in the big picture? Still not very exciting. But Patrick Graham and Scott Tolzien, I can get on board with as Patrick Graham for sure, a hire that can raise your floor because he would be working with an actually talented defense. And then if Scott Tolzien is a future star in the way that Kellen Moore was, that could be very important for the long-term outlook of the Steelers.
I guess for me, it's going to be the Mike McCarthy offense. no matter who the offensive coordinator is, it just feels like
More
it's going to be the
likely
Mike
than not.
McCarthy offense. And the Mike McCarthy offense is just not exciting me in 2026. Fair or not?
Yeah, that's exactly where I landed. Like the last 2 times that he's been replaced, the offense has immediately got better. And so that to me is a little bit of a concern. Again, we don't know who the quarterback is, so that would be an issue with, I guess, any head coach that you hire. But I kind of landed in the same spot as you, Robert. Like just kind of uninspiring. Like there's a chance that maybe he can be like a consistent 9-win coach, but like, you just fired the last guy for doing exactly that. Like that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And so I doubt it's going to be like this thing just crashes and burns and they win like 3 games at some point like that. I don't think it's going to be that. This to me, if you were going to fire a guy as steady as Tomlin, to me, it's like, yeah, then go hire some like 37-year-old. We're going to take a swing. We want a fresh set of eyes. Mike McCarthy, given how many times he's done this, just doesn't really feel like a refresher to me in that way.
Yeah, I think that there's a disconnect between with some of the discourse about Mike McCarthy in the aftermath of this. Like framing Mike McCarthy as some like bumbling buffoon is wrong. He's been an incredibly successful,
He's won a ton of games.
NFL head coach. He's won a lot of games. They were winning 10 games a year in Dallas. That's really fucking hard to do consistently. But I don't think it's some disaster. I don't think it's going to be embarrassing. I come back to the same word. It's uninspired. It's just having your third go-around retread as your answer and your next step after the Tomlin thing. It's really hard to get excited about it.
I'll say one more time. I agree with that for the most part, and I would have opted for a younger coach if I made this hire. But I don't think the Tolzien hire is official as we're recording.
No,
this.
I think they were just interviewing him. Jeremy Fowler reported that today.
I'm intrigued by the staff, and yeah, I have a fairly high degree of confidence that this won't be a disaster. But I said it on the Hangover show. That shouldn't be the bar that the Pittsburgh Steelers are trying to reach.
And I'm excited about Patrick Graham. Patrick Graham, I think, should have been on more short lists for defensive coordinators for offensive coaches in this cycle. I know a couple offensive coaches that were interviewing for jobs where he was going to be their choice. And then just before a couple things shifted. And so I'm not surprised that Mike McCarthy wanted him. If you look at the numbers, they're not going to overwhelm you, kind of similar to the Dennard Wilson conversation. The Raiders finished 16th in EPA per play on defense last year per True Media. Who are the good players on the Raiders defense other than Max Crosby?
That's like 10 spots higher than they should have finished.
That is wild. And they were bumping up against the top 10. I think it was in 2022 or 2023. They were bumping up against the top 10. I think they finished like 12th and even higher than that in DVOA. And so I think that Patrick Graham's had a couple really nice seasons as a defensive coordinator. And with a little bit more talent, I'm very excited about what he could potentially do. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this because I feel like this is like a Titanic situation where like we're just moving around the deck chairs before this whole thing's to sinks next year. This Jets situation is a disaster. Like this idea that you're going to let a potential lame duck head coach just fire the whole staff and then bring in a whole new staff and like give me one reason why I should have any faith that this New York Jets season is going to be anything less than flaming wreckage.
Well, so because of how late it's happening and how many guys are being fired, like I legitimately wonder how much of this is Glenn and how much of this is like people above him, like asking like you need to reshuffle the staff given how bad last year was. Like because this to me, like this is an ownership group in a front office that would do a little bit of that. Like this being like if they had just done this like right after the season ended and wanted to clear house, that's one thing. The fact that it's like 3-4 weeks after the season has ended makes this incredibly bizarre.
Just the whole thing. You fire 8 assistants overall. You fire the offensive coordinator who is Tanner Angstrein, by the way. It seemed like they were trying to move him into a slightly different role, and I assume he didn't take too kindly to that. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. They were going to hire Wink Martindale, seemingly, to be their defensive coordinator, but then Aaron Glenn said that he wanted to call defensive plays, and so that rules Wink Martindale out as your defensive coordinator. So you hire Brian Duker, who was the pass game coordinator for the Dolphins and happened to work for Aaron Glenn in Detroit. It's every single bit of this. And the idea, SNY reported that they've reached out to Frank Reich potentially about being the offensive coordinator. Like there is no element of this inspires any sort of hope about what this Jets season is going to look like. This has been bad from start to finish, like from the gun.
It sucks too because people have been saying since before the season was over, this is the type of year that would justify making Aaron Glenn a one and done. And maybe it's because I admired the work that he did with Detroit, where I was like, that feels harsh. I don't think I'm willing to go that far. And then you see what has happened since the season ended, and it does not inspire confidence, Robert. I don't know what else to say about it.
I mean, it is rough. Like I can't even tell you how much I feel for Jets fans. Like, to go into another season where you have a guy that was a sought-after head coach candidate, where there was a lot of justifiable excitement about what he was as a candidate, as a prospect, and then to have the season that you just had, and then now having to endure this in the months since, where there's just nothing but dysfunction radiating off this thing. My God.
And not to drive it any further, but like the guy that you thought was going to come out of college to go be your quarterback goes back to school. Like everything about this offseason has fallen in the worst way for the Jets.
If you're a Jets fan, I assume you're just finding copium in the number of draft picks that you have.
That's it.
Because what else is there?
It's truly the only thing that's worth tying yourself to at this point.
The disaster that is the coaching situation, hopefully, which you can't take that for granted with the Jets, unfortunately, but hopefully it doesn't influence Darren Moogie's ability to find good players with those draft picks. And maybe that can still happen, but that's about all I got.
Well, I mean, now you're creating disconnect between the personnel and the coaching side, because you're going to have this coaching staff influence the players that you're drafting, and then this coaching staff is immediately going to get fired.
I know. It's
bad.
It's bad.
It's the most cliche thing you can say in a situation like this. I'm going to say it anyway. This is why bad teams stay bad. And the Jets are very much on track to staying bad. Let's run through some of the coordinator hires that have happened in the last week or so. I cannot for the life of me remember which of these we've talked about and which we haven't. So we're just going to hit most of them. The Dallas Cowboys hired Christian Parker to be their defensive coordinator. My watch is over. I've been trying to make this happen for like the last 2 years. I just felt like among all of the defensive assistants and position coaches around the league, he was the one that I felt like was arguably the most exciting defensive coordinator hire to be made. I was surprised it didn't happen in the last cycle. I think that was probably because the Eagles won the Super Bowl and you couldn't talk to him for a good chunk of the hiring cycle, and just the timing of it was off. He is somebody that, I mean, I'll just walk through like why I feel this way. I first talked to him at training camp in 2022, and it was kind of random. Like he had been on the staff with Fangio, and then they kept him for the Hackett staff, and he was the DB's coach with Fangio, and those guys had played well. And he was a young coach, and I was like, I'd just love to just meet this person. And he was just incredibly impressive even then. And at that point, he was like 31, and just like his ability to communicate ideas and just the clarity and just kind of the confidence and the presence was unbelievably impressive. And then he goes to Philly, and I remember talking to him before training camp last year, and we were just talking about what makes a great defensive coordinator, because I wanted to just pick his brain about what he might be like when he eventually got the job. And he was just talking about what made Vic Fangio so special, and the elements of going beyond just like what's on the page, and how you make sure that it's beyond just a scheme thing. And I just felt like he was ready for something like this. And so for the Cowboys specifically, to not go with a name, to not go with somebody that had been a defensive coordinator or head coach before, and in my opinion, pick among like this group of candidates, potentially the best new defensive coordinator, I'm impressed with the process, and I'm excited about the end result.
If you can allow me to become a caricature of myself for a minute, but I'm the way the Cowboys have handled everything since their season ended is getting me cautiously optimistic.
I hate to agree with you.
The word is cautiously, but I have it on good authority. Brian Schottenheimer led this process, and we've talked about it. Like, you can tell by the names that they've been talking to that there is a good bit more research, attention to detail, and turning over stones to find the guys that they've talked to in this process. And to land on Christian Parker was very intentional. I think there was a desire to get something Fangio related in the building and sort of ride this wave of what's popular in the NFL right now. I don't think the Cowboys have always done that. You call it complacency, call it laziness, however mean you want to be about it. That hasn't always been the top priority with the Cowboys. And so you see the effect that Brian Schottenheimer is having. And it goes down the line, by the way. Parker is in the building now, and I think they're giving him some autonomy to call his own shots on his side of the ball. The Cowboys, it looks like they're hiring Ryan Smith as their cornerbacks coach, who was in Arizona for a long time. He oversaw Garrett Williams and the young guys on the Cardinals roster. I got to shout out my friend John Owning for finding this. Ryan Smith coached and helped bring Mansour Delane, who might be the top cornerback in this year's draft, to Virginia Tech. So a very nice track record on that side of the ball. The Cowboys are talking to Zach Orr about joining their staff. Schottenheimer spent time with him in Jacksonville. This is a very intriguing and we'll call it cutting edge crop of talent. And you don't associate the Cowboys with cutting edge, particularly when it comes to coaching. And so for them to be involved in this many intriguing names, it's very interesting. And you think about the draft picks that they have after the Micah Parsons trade, they are well positioned to have quite a makeover on the defensive side of the ball.
I'm also into this move. You know, you guys have said most of it and why it's a good hire. Like, obviously, great track record with Fangio, all the DBs. Like the Eagles DBs are talented, right? But it's a lot of young guys. And the fact that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean were immediately as good as they were, I think really says a lot. I mean, I still remember the first game that DeJean played against the Bengals last year, and he was immediately ready to go. So like that to me speaks to a little bit of coaching. And then just, I feel like over the last however many years, the ideas on the Cowboys defense have just been stale. Even when they were good with Dan Quinn, it was like, it's a guy who, like, that style of defense had been around for a while, and had been popular for a while. Obviously, most recently, like with Matt Eberflus, I think that had been a little bit of a stale thing. And so for them to go so far in the other way in terms of age, in terms of like where the defense is headed, where the game is headed, I'm into it.
I mean, off the top of my head, and again, this is a team I covered for a long time, so I can remember this stuff better, but defensive coordinators for the Dallas Cowboys, off the top of my head, Matt Eberflus most recently, Dan Quinn, which worked out, but was still a guy that had a long history and was a retread at that point in his career.
Mike Nolan,
Rod Marinelli,
all former head coaches.
This is a very big departure from what they typically do.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. And listen, you never know. You never know what's gonna happen when a guy is in the chair doing it. This is about making bets, especially with guys who have never done the job before. This is the bet I would have made. And so I'm very excited that the Cowboys ultimately went this direction. Let's keep rolling here. Brian Daboll is the offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans. Derrik, I'm going to you on this one again. As somebody who is deeply invested in the success of Cam Ward, how do you feel about Brian Daboll being the head coach or being the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans?
This feels like I'm fine saying they got on base. I would have wanted something that's a little bit more interesting to me. And I think with Brian Daboll's offense, he's had good moments, right? Obviously the year with like the good year out of Daniel Jones, they like did well to orchestrate the offense to what he does well with all the boosts, all the RPOs, all the quick game and stuff like that. And I do think Daboll having a structure that is a little bit more gun oriented, a little bit more spread, like I think that actually does favor into what Cam Ward does as a passer, where he is a guy who is just like 3-step, 5-step, I'm going to rip it, all this stuff. Like I think the passing game is orchestrated to the way that he wants to play quarterback. The complication to me is that Brian Daboll has only really ever had success when his quarterbacks are running like very good runners and running a lot. Cam Ward is not that kind of runner. Like he's a decent scrambler every now and then, but he's not a 5-6 times a game design type of runner. And so I do wonder how much of that like pinches what Brian Daboll's play calling, ability is going to look like.
I don't disagree with your initial premise, but it makes me wonder the idea that comes up so often about the offensive coaching options being a little bit tapped out. And it's easy to say like, oh, we want something different. We want somebody younger and newer. Is it easier said than done to find those guys? And so if that's harder to do, is Brian Daboll the best of, I hate to say underwhelming, but the best of the other options?
I'm fine with this. I think there are probably higher upside options, but I think this probably clears the bar for we're setting up Cam Ward to be successful. We're giving him enough when it comes to the ecosystem we're dropping him into in year 2. I think this satisfies that. Keep going through the offensive coordinator hires here. Zach Robinson going to the Bucs. I actually am excited about this. Like I understand that off, and I said this a lot when the Falcons were deciding to move on from that staff. I feel like this version of the Falcons offensive coaching staff went down a very specific road for what they wanted the offense to be, in part because of what Michael Penix liked to do. Like, I don't think that being like this pistol-heavy, non-play action offense is central to Zach Robinson's identity as an offensive coordinator. I think they just kind of boxed themselves in to what this version of things looked like. It didn't work. They ran into a dead end. I would have been interested in seeing them take a step back from that, pour everything back out onto the table, and retool what the offense should have been for next year. And so they didn't get a chance to do that, obviously, but he will get a chance to do that in Tampa, and there are already connections there that make things easy. Like Kevin Carberry is staying as the run game coordinator. Like there are so many elements of this where I do think that Zach Robinson trying to be a little bit less specific and a little bit less strange in some of the things they're doing and just being a little bit more traditional combined with the fun elements of the offense and what they were doing. I think that this absolutely can work out.
I 100% agree. Like maybe he's not one of those rising stars like Ben Johnson or whoever. Maybe he's not quite of that quality, but I think Zach Robinson did a good job in Atlanta given some of the constraints. Like the only, like, again, some of the pistol stuff, them being like as outside of the numbers as much as they were, like that to me is like a Michael Penix thing. Like that's just how he likes to operate. And then in terms of what about that offense to me like was the Zach Robinson thing, I think a lot of like the way the run game operated, like being such a zone heavy approach, I think you could argue maybe that is core to what he wants to do. But they were awesome.
I don't think that's true. I think that's the offensive line coach. That's a Ledford
okay.
thing.
That's fair.
If it were up to Zach Robinson, I think there'd be more gap scheme stuff associated with the offense, and that's why working with Carberry, who will do some of that. Like
yeah.
My personal opinion is that the Bucs offense this year will look very different than what the Falcons offense looked like last year. And so if you're worried about what the structure of that thing was and what that means for next year's Bucs team, I'd be less worried about that.
I'd be a lot less worried
as a Bucs fan.
I mean, am I oversimplifying this to think this is an attempt by Todd Bowles to get back to what worked with Liam Cohen?
No,
like that
that's
just
exactly
seems,
what it
that
is.
seems like what this is.
Yes.
Even to the point, Zach Robinson, I know it was for a cup of coffee, but Zach Robinson was in LA when Baker landed there briefly too. So like there's a little bit of familiarity. He comes from the same thing as Cohen. Like
he talked about Liam Cohen at his opening press conference. He's like, I talk to Liam Cohen all the time. Like it's not even an imagined connection. It's very stated.
Todd Bowles is just like, I want to do what worked last time. Let's do that again. Who's available?
Yeah, I'm totally fine with this, and I absolutely think this is there's a world where this works out. Speaking of retreating into what's familiar, Eric Bieniemy is the Chiefs' offensive coordinator. I've seen a couple different reads on this, and I think that there is a pessimistic and an optimistic viewpoint on this. Our buddy Mitchell Schwartz said when this hire happened, and I think this is the optimistic view, and I have a lot of respect for Mitch, and I appreciate how he's trying to see this. With Bieniemy, you have someone that has a proven track record with the franchise as the offensive coordinator and as an assistant. It seems like there are some behind-the-scenes personality elements that are good with how he affects the huddle and with that side of the ball, just in terms of accountability and mindset and all of that. That's great. So there's the ability to kind of connect with Andy Reid and that staff is proven. You spent a year with Ben Johnson. And so are there some ideas from that version of NFL offense, which is extremely different than what you run, that you can potentially bring back into a familiar scenario? And so you get the best of both worlds. You get somebody that you know can do the job, but is also helping populate the offense with new ideas. That's the optimistic view. The pessimistic view is that we're pulling from the exact same pool. This is no different. And this Chiefs offense is not going to be able to break out of the creative and intellectual slump that it has found itself in.
Where do you think you land?
Probably more with option B.
I think I do too, but I also just wonder if the Chiefs' issues are things that can be solved by personnel. Like, do we need to reinvent the wheel, or do the Chiefs just need to reinvent better the wheel?
Players? I'm in this place, and this is the place I consistently am in. I go back to the Dak Prescott Cowboys from this year. Just because your quarterback can do all the hard things doesn't mean you can't give him more easy things to do.
Okay, I hear you, but and the Cowboys offense did do that, and it was very refreshing. They also added an all-pro receiver.
That's fair, but
they had two of them. It's really nice to have two all-pro receivers.
I think you can do both of those things.
You can.
I think you can do both of those things at the same time. And so there is absolutely a world where the personnel improves and a lot of the issues that we saw with the Chiefs offense disappear or become marginalized. At the same time, I don't think you only have to solve it by getting different players. I think there are structural things you can do to make this easier.
I agree with that. Like, if I was doing the hiring, I would have wanted someone that is going to bring in more new ideas for Andy Reid and for the staff, not somebody who has been there before, even if some of the behind the scenes stuff and really pushing guys like is going to be valuable for them. And so I think where I land with it is I would have, in the perfect world, wanted to have hired something a little bit different and kind of inject this thing with a little bit of something else. At the same time, I do think this will be better than what the offense was with Matt Nagy. And you do that and add one or two different personnel things at the pass catchers, and like, they're probably the 6th best offense in the league again. Like, I don't think it's as good as it could be and like as perfect as we want with Mahomes at quarterback, but I think it will be better and they will fix some things.
That's probably where I land too. Again, I'm not going to lose sleep over them hiring Eric Bieniemy to be the offensive coordinator. I just would have been curious how it would have looked if they had brought in somebody who does come from a different place.
I'm mainly just happy I wasn't gaslit by the whole Matt Nagy thing in general. Like the way that whole thing was framed, as it like the Chiefs were like, well, we're just getting out in front of his eventual head coaching job. No, that was never a thing.
I just can't believe they tried to do that.
I felt like a crazy person for like 3 weeks. And everybody was like, well, yeah, like the Chiefs need to do this. And I was like, it's fine if they want to change their OC, because they should, but not for this.
It feels like
because Matt Nagy is at the top of anybody's list to get a head coaching job.
I think he might have been at the top of the Titans list.
And
I think that's
for a very obvious reason.
Yes.
Though.
And I think that may be one of the reasons they framed it the way that they did. But treating it as some just inevitability that Matt Nagy was going to be a head coach, I just don't understand why that would be the case. Like,
it
felt
reason. It felt very much like what we're hearing about Clint Kubiak, right? Which makes a lot more sense considering what the Seahawks have done this year and the fact that they're about to play in the Super Bowl. None of it made sense other than that the Chiefs were ready to make a change. And it's not the most inspiring or different change, but yeah, just a strange news cycle there in Kansas City for a few weeks.
Few more coordinator things to hit here. Jonathan Gannon is the Packers' new defensive coordinator. Why? So my first response to this is kind of like, okay, like if you look at what the Eagles' defense was under Jonathan Gannon, it was a very specific kind of simple defense. They rushed 5 a lot. They played a lot of quarters. They had a lot of really good players. And I don't even mean that in a derogatory way. I think that Jonathan Gannon, to me, is a very interesting coach in a bunch of different facets. If you look at what the Cardinals' offense was over the last couple of years, that is not Jonathan Gannon's vision. And I'm not even trying to like pass the buck there. I actually think that's interesting because I think some people, if you're a Packers fan, looking at what the Cardinals were over the last 2 seasons and trying to project that onto the Packers, I think that's incorrect. I don't think that is what this is going to look like. I think it's going to look like something closer to what the Eagles were if Jonathan Gannon has his druthers. But he hires Bobby Babich to be his pass game coordinator immediately. And Bobby Babich, look at what he did with the Bills. They're doing the craziest disguise and coverage rotation shit all the time. And so Jonathan Gannon, I think, when he went to Arizona, the fact that he just kind of ceded the defense to Nick Rallis and the idea that he's going to bring in somebody like Babich who's very different than him in terms of ideology, he doesn't have like a ton of ego when it comes to like, this is the best way to do it, even if he has things he believes. And so I don't know what this is going to look like, but the idea of pairing a Gannon with somebody like Babich and trying to figure out what the middle ground with that is, I think it's at least intriguing.
I think it's intriguing to me too. Like to me, bringing in Babich and like getting some of that Bills DNA, like when that Bills defense was at its best at any point under Sean McDermott, it was when the safeties could really communicate and spin and do all this crazy stuff. The safeties the Packers have one of the best safety rooms in the league with Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams, and both of them are fantastic at playing high, playing in the box, playing wherever. They can play a little bit of man-to-man. Like the idea that those two guys are going to potentially be like the fulcrum for this defense, I'm pretty into that.
I'm oversimplifying it, but you just tell me. And I think that's a good point by you, that look at what Jonathan Gannon did in Philly. Well, in Philly, Hassan Reddick had far and away the best year of his career for Jonathan Gannon. Who do the Packers have? Micah Parsons. That whole front was also amazing. And so if Jonathan Gannon can do some cool shit with Micah Parsons and get more out of the other guys there, I mean, I guess we'll see what the future holds for Rashawn Gary, but if he's still with the Packers, if you can maximize him to a better degree, and then you've got Babich working on the back end, simplified, but I think very intriguing.
Yeah, I'm in it as like just a place to land if you're the Packers at the end of this process. The Miami Dolphins have hired Bobby Slowik to be their offensive coordinator to pair with Jeff Hafley. Those guys obviously work together in San Francisco. There's familiarity there. Derrik, I'm going to give this one to you. How do you feel about round 2 of Bobby Slowik as an offensive coordinator?
I'm at least intrigued because I don't think Bobby Slowik was like war criminal level bad offensive coordinator. I think he showed some like decent stuff, and just ultimately in his second year at the job, offensive line was bad and he just didn't fully develop. But now he's taken a little bit of time. He's taken a different job, like able to maybe step back and breathe and like reassess what he wants to be. And so now that he's getting a fresh slate with a place that I assume that he'll get a little bit more of a runway, like I don't know how good it's going to be. I don't know what the ceiling's going to be. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces with that offense, but I don't know. I'm intrigued to see him get another shot at it. I really am.
Where I sit with this is when they fire Bobby Slowik at the end of the 2024 season, I think it kind of had to happen based on what happened to the offense. Like the offense just completely imploded. But I think Bobby Slowik could do a fine job in a second stint as an offensive coordinator. I think both of those things can be true at the same time. Like the offense completely imploded by the end in Houston, but I think that's for reasons that go beyond Bobby Slowik's capability as a play caller.
Coaching is such a wild zero-sum game because think about 2023. Bobby Slowik got head coaching looks off of 1 year where CJ Stroud was the man, and it was so bad in Houston. A, he gets fired, and B, I think just the general tone. Like if you were to bring up Bobby Slowik now, people would be like, Bobby Slowik, ew. It's like, what? 2 years ago, we wanted to make this guy a head coach. And we all know, like, the ecosystem in Houston sucks. I'm not trying to let CJ Stroud off the hook. The whole thing's bad. It was bad 2 years ago. It was bad this year. And if you look at Bobby Slowik's resume without knowing his name, you're just like, oh, this guy's been in the league for a decade plus, and he's followed Shanahan around, and he's deeply intimate with the Shanahan coaching system, and he was so good that somebody hired out of San Francisco took him with him to his next job. He's called plays before and helped somebody win Rookie of the Year. That sounds pretty good to me. Good enough to the point where I'd be willing to give him another shot and not think it's a terrible idea.
I wonder what the run game looks like. That's my question here. Not even a concern, but so they're bringing over the assistant offensive line coach from the Texans, Zach Yenzer, who was there under Slowik. He was the assistant line coach for the last 2 years. And so I'm just curious, like pass protection, run game, like those are the first two things I would go to. Overall, I think that there's a level of quality and competency with him as an offensive coordinator. I think there are just some things lingering from the Houston days that I'll be curious why and how they will be different this time around.
And I think the last thing too, like obviously so much of why the Houston thing fell apart. In 2023, they kind of got away with the offensive line being what it was. 2024, it falls apart. The Miami Dolphins offensive line is not great, but it's kind of nice. Like their center played some of the best football of anybody in the sport this year. I think they have a nice young left tackle. Like the guards, I think, are better than they were previously. Like this, I don't know if it's going to be special right away, but I do think some of the pass protection stuff, some of the run game stuff, I think they're going to have more options than I think he probably ever had in Houston.
Last one here. The Washington Commanders have hired 2 coordinators. I don't think we've talked about David Blau, even though he got hired like 3 weeks ago because of how much shit has happened since between now and then. I can understand this. I mean, the sense that like Blau was a very highly thought of assistant even before, like when he was a lower level assistant. I think he was always somebody that was going to be in the mix for offensive coordinator jobs. My main question about this is not whether he's an exciting hire, because I do think he is based on the reputation. I'm just curious what this looks like. Like, how similar is this to the offense they were running when he was on the staff with Kliff Kingsbury? He was on the Lions. He was on the practice squad in 2023 when Ben Johnson was there. How much of that stuff do they carry over? Like, structurally, I just don't know what a David Blau offense looks like.
I've already brought him up once on this show, but it reminds me a lot of Kellen Moore. I think the similarities are there. Like very successful college quarterback. I mean, Kellen was like one of the most successful college quarterbacks ever, but David Blau, good college quarterback, kicked around the league as a player for a little bit and just got identified by the coaches he was with as a guy worth fast tracking. And again, you get moved from assistant quarterbacks coach to OC when Tavita Pritchard leaves in the middle of the season. Yeah. And then it's just like, okay, well, you're the OC now. You're 30 years old. And Kellen, when he started out, Scott Linehan was his big influence. And I don't know the answer to that for David Blau. Like, is it Kliff Kingsbury because they were together in Arizona and he followed him to Washington? Is it Ben Johnson? Ideally, maybe you're blending those things. I don't know, but I'm always interested in a coach that gets fast tracked like this by veteran head coaches who have been around the game. So I don't know what it'll look like, but I think it's a very interesting hire.
He's 30
years old.
Yeah.
That's the part of it to me that is crazy. Like he's only been coaching for 2 years, and it was all on this staff, obviously. And so I'm really interested to see what it looks like. My assumption, obviously, this is not based on like talking to anybody or anything, but I'm assuming if you're wanting to move on from Kliff, you're wanting something that is a little bit more pro style,
That's
little bit more the Ben Johnson era. But like how far on the spectrum do they go? Like, does it go 100% over to the Ben Johnson side, or is it more like 75%, and you still try to do some of the stuff that like Jaden Daniels is really comfortable with from the gun? I don't know.
I do a lot during training camp. I spend a lot of my time during training camp like trying to talk to young assistants, just guys that are a couple of rungs down the staff for this exact reason. And one of the things I always ask them is essentially like, what is your football value system? Like, if you were kind of, where do you come from? What do you believe in? Just trying to get a beat on like what they would potentially do if they were ever elevated to one of these roles. I wish I had been able to ask David Blau that question at any point, because I have absolutely no idea as we sit here and talk about it.
Well, you didn't know he'd get promoted twice in a 1 month period.
I figured he might. There was a lot. I was talking to the coordinators for the most part when I was in Washington last year. Speaking of, Durante Jones is the new defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. He's somebody that also was on the Cowboys' radar when he was somebody that they interviewed. And who knows? Like, there's sometimes you try to get the secret sauce from like a very specific sort of defense and a very specific sort of system, and it doesn't always translate. But Derrik, in my mind, it's worth trying. Like, seeing if you can get some facsimile even of the Minnesota Vikings defense for
facsimile
for what
good. Okay, Mizzou. What a word.
And I actually do think I think maybe my favorite part of the hiring here, or at least the thought process, is Jones was on the Viking staff a year before Brian Flores took the job, and he actually kept him around. And he's obviously kept him this entire time that Flores has been there. And so I actually think that shows, one, a little bit of adaptability on Jones's part, because obviously the defense prior to Brian Flores was very, very different. But also the fact that a new guy comes in, kind of evaluates the staff and goes, all right, we'll keep you on. And they've done a really, really good job consistently. Like that speaks volumes to me. And so again, if you're not going to go from the McDonald Fangio tree or whatever, this is probably the next best style of defense I would try to be picking from. So I'm interested to see what this looks like.
In that same vein, the guy that I think will be on that radar next year for not the exact same reason, but has a similar background, Carl Scott will be a defensive coordinator next year. Carl Scott is the defense. He's the passing game coordinator for Seattle. Mike McDonald kept him on from the Pete Carroll staff to his staff. And so similar, where you have like a very good defensive coach who's like, yeah, I want that guy. That's a guy I think I'm willing to bet on.
I don't mean this in a glib way, but the thing I'm most interested in with the Commanders is just my eyebrows go up when Dan Quinn took play calling from Joe Witt in the middle of the year and then fired him, and then Kliff Kingsbury gets ousted after the year. And so that's just a situation where I'm like, all right, are we talking about you making all the right decisions at the end of the 2026 season and being in contender for Coach of the Year because the way you revamped everything, or is the Commander's job open? Like, that doesn't feel like there's a lot of room for in between.
There isn't. I mean, as soon as you move on from two coordinators, the way to avoid any sort of hot seat conversation is to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like Nick Sirianni did. Like that's what we're talking about.
That buys you some time.
We're sitting here saying, man, Dan Quinn, just every decision he made was the right one. Or we're saying, Jaden Daniels is still only 26. Of course you want this job. Like, those are the options.
All right. That is all we've got for this side of the conversation. Like I said at the top of the show, we have got discussions with both Joe Buscaglia and Zach Berman about the Bills hiring Joe Brady and the interminable offensive coordinator search for the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's get to those conversations right now. Joining us now, it is our esteemed Buffalo Bills writer here at The Athletic, Joe Buscaglia. Joe, how you doing, man? Heck of a week.
A week and a half. I was just joking with Michael before we started recording. It's felt like 10 years have passed since I left Denver for the divisional round. And I don't really know what day it is. So here we go.
Let's set the scene a little bit. I was flying home on Monday. I took my brother to see Duke play for Christmas. He's been a huge Duke fan for like his entire life. And so we went to Cameron. It was awesome. It was a great experience. And so I'm flying back Tuesday morning. And I think as the plane is taken off, I get an ESPN alert. And Joe Brady has been hired as the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And I was kind of like, all right. So at the end of all of this, that's where we land. We land with the offensive coordinator that was already on the staff getting the head job after comments about hitting the playoff wall and just feeling like there needed to be a change, and how much change is this really? And so I wanted to dig into this with you because I think with a lot of the other moves that we've talked about on this show already, there's a level of like transparency and understanding where I can get my arms around them. I understand why they happened. Why Joe Brady is the head coach of the Buffalo Bills at this point in the franchise is a little bit harder for me to understand. And so I'm going to pose that seemingly simple, but obviously not, question to you. Why was Joe Brady the choice at the end of this process for the Bills?
Well, I think there's an extremely convoluted answer there. I think it all begins because where they are in their build and where Josh Allen is in his career, I think is the strongest indicator of anything, that they didn't want to invite the variable that of bringing a new head coach, a new offensive philosophy, a new everything. Because what they have seen since Joe Brady has taken over as the offensive coordinator for Ken Dorsey during the 2023 season is the offense starting to uptick in a way and really speaking to Josh Allen the way that it didn't, up until Dorsey was removed. He was a good quarterback a really good quarterback when Brian Daboll was here. Then kind of had some lulls with Dorsey, and then Brady arrived. And the collaborative nature behind Brady is the reason why so many players in the building are really a fan of him. So because they didn't want to bring in that variable of a new person having to acclimate themselves with Josh Allen, I think that is reason number one for me as to why they went for Joe Brady. And we've also seen throughout the test of time here in Buffalo, they have done so many things to keep Josh Allen happy. Like this is the whole, like every single quarterback room they have ever had has been basically Josh Allen's buddies. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because Josh Allen hasn't missed a start the entire time since his rookie season. But that said, it all has been with one intent in mind. So that's the big reason. But then it gets a little bit more convoluted because it's like, okay, you wanted a change. Like you alluded to, you hit this proverbial playoff wall, and rather than bringing in a fresh new start, which is what I think a lot of people outside of the building would have expected, you just roll back basically the same thing that you just had on offense. And even to the point of Joe Brady continuing to be the offensive play caller, which I confirmed with a team source yesterday. So there's all of these different elements to it. Like, okay, how much difference is there going to be in Joe Brady being the CEO, the head man, while still assuming that play caller responsibilities, and him potentially spreading himself too thin, because we've seen that happen before? And how much different is it going to be with a new defensive coordinator, which I think is really going to be the biggest difference in all of this. And it just makes you go, okay, well, what really is the vision here? Do they really think that Joe Brady gives them such a higher ceiling, or was this really just about changing the voice at the top of the entire operation?
There's a lot to dig into there. And I understand if you're trying to kind of fulfill the two objectives on the offensive side of the ball, where you want some continuity when it comes to Josh with somebody that has done this before, but you also want someone he likes, right? And so I think the having someone he likes part of it, that's where Davis Webb might have been a potential option. But again, you're not carrying over what you've done successfully. So maybe that's out. So the two guys, in my opinion, that check the boxes of what you're saying, where there's a previous relationship with Josh Allen, and there are guys that have done this before to a degree, are Brian Daboll and Joe Brady. Why ultimately do you think that in their minds, Joe Brady was the better option than Brian Daboll? Because if I'm trying to win the optics battle here, if I'm Buffalo, Brian Daboll's an easier way to do that because you can sell everything that you just said while also selling that this is a new start and this is a new set of voices. With Brady, there's part of me that you see that being the end result. And my first thought is kind of like, well, then why fire McDermott? Like, why do this for that to be the final result? And with Daboll, I think you can at least sell that you're turning a page while giving consideration to everything else that you just said. So between those two guys specifically, because in my mind, that's what I thought was going to happen. I thought Brian Daboll was going to be the head coach and they were going to sell it in all of those ways, and that didn't happen. So ultimately, when it came down to it, why do you think Brady was the choice over somebody like Daboll?
Yeah, and to your point, Brian Daboll would have been an easy sell to the community because he's from here, and any fences they would have had to mend with how the whole Sean McDermott firing went down, which was a thing here when it initially happened. He could have easily been able to do that because he's a personality. He's a Buffalo guy. He comes back to his grammar school's beer tent every single summer. Like, that's just who he is. But why they inevitably went with Joe Brady over a Brian Daboll situation, I think, is just to try and continue what they've built on offense, because Brandon Beane has kind of alluded to them having a great offense a couple of years ago. And then, last year, even though they went through their offensive struggles, I think the one thing they'll probably put their hat on here is the fact that they still averaged over 28 points a game. But if you dig into the games themselves, it wasn't exactly like a fluid operation. Like, there were so many inconsistent times, and especially down the stretch of the season, I felt the defense, more than anybody, was keeping them in games. And it almost, the national perspective on them, it was kind of weird in that sense, because McDermott was piecing that thing together pretty well over the last couple of months of the season once they started to get Cole Bishop up and, him becoming a real impact player for them. So the fact that they decided to stay in-house, it's a little confusing. And this is the exact reason why I'm on the show today, and I know that. But it's almost as though they just felt like with McDermott, it just wasn't going to go further than it did. Or maybe it was a matter of, his defense maybe not fitting the modern day NFL anymore. And that is a potential piece of the situation too, because as long as McDermott was there, then, the defense and the scheme and the players that they choose to be on the team weren't really going to change the archetypes that they were looking for. So that's a potential scenario in this. And then the other thing I think that has always been kind of the what if situation here in Buffalo is when McDermott was the head coach, being the defensive minded guy that he is, we saw it play out with Brian Daboll in 2022, where he left after some really great success. And all of a sudden Josh Allen's play caller was gone. And I don't think the Bills wanted to go through that situation again. So rather than doing that exact operation, they just went ahead and named his play caller the new head coach, and they're going to try and figure it out from there.
The McDermott role and how the defensive players were chosen, if you're trying to have some cope about the role Brandon Beane has played in all of this and the way their front office and team construction has played into all of this, that would be a way to do it, where you could say, well, McDermott's seeking out certain body types on defense, and that's why they've been left wanting. I think that you're probably telling yourself a story a little bit with that, but I can understand the argument. So I get that part of it. I also get the idea that even if Joe Brady was there, having a different head coach at the front of the room and having a different feeling across the building, that can be a good thing. Like, there can be substantial change. I mean, you're talking about him now being the head coach at again, every team meeting, he's the one setting the tone, the culture, everything. And then a defensive coordinator comes in, and now an entire half of the ball is different. And so I do think that things can feel different even if you promote someone that was already on the staff. So I'm being a little bit flippant about that, but I do think that's a possibility. I'm curious now about why some of the limitations with the offense existed and whether those limitations will continue with Joe Brady as the head coach. And there's a couple different things that come to mind. This idea that Joe Brady was too run heavy for an offense that has Josh Allen, that I'm not really on board with, because I look at what they built over the last couple years, and we talked about this all the time in like the 2022 into 2023 season, where I felt like having a consistent part of the offense where you could rely on the run, you could kind of do a little bit of everything. What did they say? Like a dual-pronged offense, like an offense that can you can attack on two fronts. Like McDermott said that all the time. And I think that version of the offense gave you the best version of Josh Allen because it kind of robbed him of his worst instincts. It allowed him to play within himself and kind of slow his heartbeat a little bit. They gave you the best version of him. Did we overcompensate for that a little bit at some points this year where you're running the ball too much? Maybe. But I think overall the idea is fine. The question then becomes, this version of the offense, is that solely a distillation of Joe Brady's vision for what the offense should be? Or is there a decent chunk of McDermott's input in that? And the other part of it is, if you get some better pass catchers, do we see a different version of the offense? And so this idea that they wanted to carry this vision over, I'm curious how much of the vision actually carries over when you have different personnel and when you have Brady able to run this thing without any sort of limitations or input from a defensive-minded head coach.
Yeah, that's a super smart setup for that entire thing, and there's a lot to unpack there. Where I'll start is with McDermott's vision, because I talked to Sean a lot over the years about, offensively what he's looking for, and the one thing he has always pointed to in those situations is he's an Andy Reid guy. Like, he wants to throw the ball, but he also wants to maintain the threat to run, which is something that they really struggled with early on in their build leading up to what they've been the last couple of years. And it went almost too much the other way, that they went into the everybody eats era of Buffalo Bills wide receiver football. And it really wound up being that no one could get down the field anymore and uncover past like 7, 8, 9, 10 yards. So because I think there was some major roster limitations to allow them to be this two-dimensional team that McDermott craved for them to be. And along those lines, Brady kind of constructed his offense and the way that they chose to call the plays in the vision of what they were best at. And there's no argument here with what they were best at. They had one of the best offensive lines in the league, and they had one of the best running backs in the league this year. And even though they had Josh Allen, you can't ignore the fact that their pass catchers were terrible this season. If we're being perfectly blunt, like, their top boundary receiver in the Denver game was a guy they picked up on week 13. Like, what are we talking about here? And he's 31 years old. No disrespect to Brandon Cooks, but like, that's how bad the situation was. Like, Keon Coleman, if there weren't two guys who tore their ACLs in Jacksonville, he would have been a healthy scratch the entire postseason. So this is more convoluted than just Sean McDermott's vision of the offense. Like, I get, like, everyone thinks, oh, Sean wants to run the ball more. In theory, kind of, yes, but he just wants to do it a little bit more effectively. But there's also culpability here for Brandon Beane, because the wide receiver position has not gone well for him. And the comments that he made to a local radio station right after the draft have kind of haunted him a bit about the wide receiver position. And that is something that I think they're going to take a major look at and potentially overhaul the entire situation, because they know it needs to be better. And they also kind of have to shift a little bit here too, because they have two of their offensive linemen that are going to be free agents, in Connor McGovern and David Edwards. And they're not household names, but David Edwards is a damn good guard. And Connor McGovern...
They're hugely important pieces of what this Bills team is. It's massively, it's crucial. Yep. And I would try to keep one of them if I could. And you and I will have this conversation hopefully at the combine about like the offseason outlook for the Bills and where the money needs to move around. But I think that they need to do their best to try to keep one of those guys if they can. The comments to the radio station is a great thing to bring up. And obviously they've been repeated over and over and over again, because my sense of this, and I'm not trying to like defend Brandon Beane in all of this, I just think when you look at the moves they made last spring, they made sense in the moment for like how they wanted to build the room. You hope that Keon Coleman is going to take a step. You drafted him in the top 35. You can't pretend that if you go into this season thinking he's going to be a 0, you've already lost. Like there's no way to optimize your team building process by going into the season thinking he's going to be a 0. You have to hope that he's going to be something for you. You go sign Josh Palmer in free agency, and then you hope Dalton Kincaid in a lot of ways can be your most explosive pass catcher. That combination with the other 2 tight ends and with Shakir and James Cook, as an idea, I understand it. That idea went as poorly as it possibly could have gone on every single front. Coleman did nothing. He was a healthy scratch. Palmer gets hurt, and now you have no outside receivers. Kincaid misses half the season, and you're left with this absolute disaster. That happens sometimes from a team building perspective, where you have these general managers try to make these incremental changes to these position groups. The bottom falls out, and then they come into the next offseason and they're like, well, the half measure didn't work. We got to do something serious now. And I think that's exactly where the Bills' wide receiver process is probably going to be. You're going to see them do something ambitious and aggressive this spring because of how last year went. And I think overall as a process, that's okay. It would have been okay if it hadn't happened with the radio station. If that doesn't happen, it would be so easy to look at it through the lens of everything that I just laid out. But because that happened, it's totally spun the other way.
Yep. And I think if there's one critique of the way that they went about it in 2025, it was almost too much of an over-reliance on Keon's development, where they didn't give themselves enough of a wiggle room, enough of a path to navigate if that didn't go well. Like and to their credit, Keon did show some flashes over a 2-game stretch in his rookie season. Then he hurt his wrist. Actually, Jordan Poyer for the Dolphins is the one that popped him, and he was down for 4 games, I think it was, and he wasn't really the same when he came back. And to their credit, in training camp, not in the early stages, but like the middle to end stages, Keon looked like he was really coming on a bit to where they're like, okay, we've got this. Then he has the Ravens game, which also needs context because heading into the fourth quarter, he had only 1 catch for 17 yards. Then they throw the ball basically 100% of the time, and he dominates the fourth quarter against Jair Alexander, who retired 2 months later. So that is also context that is needed here. But that said, they should have given themselves a little bit more of a chance. And the one way that I can point to with this is they completely ignored the receiver position in last year's draft. The only guy that they drafted was Caden Prather in the 7th round. They had like 10 picks in this draft, and they went defense for most of them, especially in the first 4 rounds. Like if you replace one of TJ Sanders or Deion Walker, and they won't want to replace Deion Walker anymore because he's been a fine for them. But if you replace one of those defensive tackles with a wide receiver, the entire situation looks different, and you at least have some kind of hope. So I think that's where it kind of led them astray, and that's the biggest reason why I could see them trading for a big name or trading way up to get one of the big names in the draft to do this thing. But the only tricky part is if they're trading for a veteran, they're pretty much up against it on the cap right now, and they're going to have to do some work to fit that guy in.
The name I keep coming back to, and we'll talk about this as we get closer to the offseason, but I'm calling Jacksonville and asking what they want for Brian Thomas Jr. That's the first thing I'm doing, because that allows you to worry about the cap situation. And if you have to pay out the nose draft capital wise, again, they put themselves in this position. I think overall, we talked about this before they made the hire. I think there's a chance that the Bills just like win the Super Bowl next year, because football is as much about variance as it is about a lot of other things. And we pretend that's not true, but it is. And so the idea that it would be Daboll or Joe Brady or whoever, the Bills having like the best offense in the league next year because they still have a good offensive line, they still have Josh Allen, and like the pass catching group is mildly better is 100% on the table. The defense now is where like the real, and obviously, honestly, that's an argument for not hiring an offensive-minded head coach, by the way, because the offense, no matter who's over there, is probably going to be okay when you have Josh Allen. The defense becomes the biggest question now. Like you said, there are reports that Jim Leonhard, and you wrote this today, there's reports that Jim Leonhard is the favorite to get that job. If that happens, I think Bills fans might be, I could see feeling okay about how this is all gone. Like in the end, being like, all right, if that's the staff, like let's roll. We'll probably be in a decent spot. What do you think the defense coordinator search looks like right now? And what do you think are the considerations as they weigh who those options should be?
Yeah, I think really anything or anybody is on the table for them right now because it is. I would not be surprised if they try to overpay to get whoever they want the most in Buffalo because it is so vital to what they're going to do. Because now, because they have really just signed off on this offense that they've run over the last 2.5 seasons as their vision moving forward, with Joe Brady at the head of that. That also gives complete autonomy to whoever they hire to be that defensive coordinator and set them up to potentially become a head coach of their own, basically becoming the head coach of the defense the way that Brian Daboll was the head coach of the offense when he was in Buffalo, the way that Joe Brady was the head coach of the offense when he was the offensive coordinator. So it is an attractive job in that respect, but it is going to take some time too, because if they are changing things up schematically, like let's say they go to an odd man front, that completely changes the entire dynamic. But even something as simple of, okay, your principal, are you going to be a zone team or a man team? Do you have the man cover corners to do it? You probably do, but you know, probably not at nickel, and there's still some other stuff. Do you want to get bigger at linebacker, which was an issue for them? How do their defensive ends fit into the situation if they're not like a 7 technique rather than a 9 technique, which some teams do. So it all comes into just what the philosophies of this defensive mind is, and that's why they absolutely have to nail this. I think there's going to be a lot of turnover on the defensive staff. I think there's going to be a lot of turnover on the defensive personnel side with a bunch of the players, because that's the only way to go about it. There have been so many holdovers from the McDermott years that I think could have played their last down in Buffalo. And that is ultimately, I think, what is going to dictate the ceiling, ironically enough, of the Buffalo Bills in 2026. And to your point, like, the variance is crazy. I could see the Bills winning the Super Bowl next year with Joe Brady as the head coach. I could also see them missing the playoffs entirely, and then we have another head coach conversation next year. Like, it's just, with McDermott, this is what you removed. You knew what you had. You knew you were getting a floor. You knew that you were even going to push towards the AFC Championship game, maybe even to the Super Bowl if a couple of things go your way. With Brady, all bets are off. We don't know.
Nickel is an interesting thing to bring up. I think the decision they make on Taron Johnson is going to be like a canary in the coal mine sort of thing. Mm-hmm. If they like make him a June 1 cut and move on from him, I think it really shows, okay, we're going in a wholly different direction here. This whatever version of the Bills we used to be, we are no longer holding on to. I think in a lot of ways, because the other guys, like Trey White's a free agent, right? Milano's a free agent. Like, there are so many guys that are just going to be gone anyway. Taron Johnson is the one guy who was like a pillar of what the Bills used to be defensively, who is still under contract. And that's the one, when I was looking at the contracts today, where I was like, I'll be curious what they do there, because I think that will be a symbol of like where this thing may be going under a different defensive coordinator. It's going to be fascinating. You and I'm sure we'll talk about this many more times over the course of this offseason, because again, when it comes to the big names they might trade, what the defensive makeover might look like, this is going to be one of the more intriguing teams of the spring of 2026, and I'm very excited to dig into it. Joe Buscaglia, awesome to talk with you, man. Always appreciate the time. We'll do it again very soon.
Thanks, Robert.
Joining us now is one of our wonderful Eagles writers here at The Athletic, our old friend Zach Berman. Zach, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Excited to have this conversation with you. All right, let's go through this. I want to just start with a big picture idea. How much should Eagles fans be concerned about the way this search has gone, and how much should general NFL fans take from what this search has felt like from the Eagles building? Because I think that there's a case to be made that there are alarm bells worth sound. The fact that this is a team that won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, has a ton of talent, and didn't seem to be able to land some of the best offensive coordinator candidates on the board. Like, the idea that Brian Daboll would rather go coach Cam Ward who quarterbacked the worst team in the league last season rather than coming to Philadelphia feels like it's something worth paying attention to. But I also understand how some of this happens. So if you had to kind of pin down how we've arrived at this moment with the Eagles offensive coordinator search, how would you start doing that?
Yeah, it's a fair question because we're talking here January 29th. The season ended 2 weeks ago, and they're still searching. And they're the only team that had a sitting head coach and offensive coordinator vacancy where that spot's still open. They started the search really with a targeted approach. I think Mike McDaniel and Brian Daboll were two former head coaches, play callers, who they were interested in at the jump. When those and they knew that was ambitious, and they knew they weren't certain to land them for a variety of factors we can get into. I think once that happened, once those coaches chose elsewhere, they were committed to casting a wide net, to exploring not just different candidates, but different ideas. It's got gathering intel on their offense, gathering intel on kind of trends around the league, and not abiding by an arbitrary timeline at that point. So I think it was a targeted approach at first, and then I think since then there hasn't been this urgency to make a hire for the sake of making a hire.
That makes a ton of sense. And so if those are your two top quality candidates, you miss out on them. It's like, okay, the rest of the pool is similar in terms of how attractive the candidates are. Let's make sure we're turning over every rock to find the best one. I get that part of it. So that's why this is extending maybe a little bit longer than you'd want. But I still think that there are potentially issues and concerns with why those guys wouldn't want to take this job. And so I'm sure it might be different for different people, but if you had to zero in on a reason that a guy like Brian Daboll would not want the Eagles offensive coordinator job, what do you think that says?
Yeah, so it's a great question because the attractiveness of the jobs come up often, and I think each coach might have different reasons, right? Whether you're talking about Mike McDaniel and being in California with Justin Herbert, and when you look at the Tennessee situation, the reality is that you're joining a defensive head coach. You probably have, you're the head coach of the offense, for lack of a better term. Your time horizon you're dealing with is probably more generous than in Philadelphia, and it's a different market. I think there's like big picture. There's a few factors that have complicated this. You can look at this job and you can say, in the past decade, 3 Eagles offensive coordinators have gone on to become head coaches. This has been a springboard job. It's a high-profile team. There's a lot of talent here. There's also, if you put in a list of the top owners and GMs in the league, the Eagles have that. So there might be some pixie dust, if you will, that a potential head coach would want to come here and learn from. The flip side to this is number one, it's a quarterback who his credentials are unquestioned. Super Bowl MVP, 5 playoff appearances in 5 years. But you're probably having him adjust to your offense, or you're adjusting to him more than he's adjusting to your offense, right? And he's not the only quarterback in the league you'd say that about. But the reality is, you're trying to fit Jalen into your system. That's number one. Number two, this is an intense place. You know this well, Robert, when you've been here. Like this is a very passionate fan base. It's a very intense media market. It's harder to be anonymous. It's the type of thing, and I don't think this is totally fair for Philly fans, but Kevin Patullo, the former offensive coordinator, his home was egged, right? And that's the exception. That's not the rule. But it kind of becomes like throwing snowballs at Santa Claus, where it's attached to the job in league circles, and that's something that they're fighting, if you will. The third thing is there's a lot of internal pressure. It's not just external pressure. If you think about this, the last 2 offensive coordinators that were fired, it came after 11 win seasons. If that happens with the New York Jets, you get a contract extension. Happens with the Eagles, you're dismissed, right? And it's also a place where there's a lot of stakeholders involved. It's a strong GM, strong owner, a Super Bowl winning head coach, credentialed quarterback, right? There's an offensive line coach that might be the best in the league at his role. There's a lot of different people who have established voices and earned equity, if you will, that it's not coming in to a blank slate. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, as much as we talk about the blue chip talent, there's ambiguity about what that's going to look like. I had a conversation with Saquon Barkley this season where he said the 2 best players on the team are Lane Johnson and A.J. Brown. I can't tell you that A.J. Brown and Lane Johnson are going to be on the team next year. So that's me saying it, not Saquon. I can't transition from that. So I bring that up as a way of saying the blue chip talent is only there if it's there. And I think there's a lot of questions about what the Eagles offense will look like next year. So I can give you all the pluses for the job, and they're real, but there are reasons why someone would look at a different opportunity and be attracted to it.
I think that's fantastically laid out. And listen, the egging of the house is like that gets a lot of headlines. And this isn't about like the fans are mean. You said 2 of the last 4 offensive coordinators and 3 of the last 5 or 3 of the last 6 have gotten head coaching jobs. Well, the other 2 of those last 4 in the Sirianni era got fired after 1 year.
Yes.
And so those are the 2 paths. You either get a head coaching job or you're fired after 1 year. And so that, to somebody like Brian Daboll, who is probably pretty confident that if he does a solid job at a place like Tennessee, will be in the mix again next year for head coaching jobs, he doesn't need to deal with the headache of all of the pressure that comes along with a place like Philly. And I really do like the idea of the strength and the stature of the stakeholders. Because when you're Brian Daboll and you go work with Robert Saleh in Tennessee, the expectations are different. The entire side of the ball is yours. That's you. You are the head coach of the offense down there. In Philly, that's just never going to be the case. You have an offensive-minded head coach who is going to have some input on the way things have gone. You have a GM and just a personnel department who, again, has a ton of power in that building. And for somebody like Mike McDaniel, I think it's a similar thing. Like, he's going to get to go over there. He's going to get to implement his vision with the CEO-type head coach. And so I completely understand all of that. So that's why they were not able to get those guys and why we're still working through the process. Let's talk about the current state of the process and what the pool of candidates looks like. You know, they've really done, you said cast a wide net. They've done that. I mean, the overall group that they're looking at, guys like Declan Doyle and other candidates that are involved in this job, Declan Doyle and Matt Nagy run extremely different offensive systems if you look at what those offenses are. And so the fact that they're going to all these different places looking for solutions, I find that interesting. So if you had to kind of pick out the 3 to maybe 5 names that you think are the most relevant right now and why they might make sense for the job, what would that look like?
Yeah, so one name that's emerged in the past, 48 hours or so is Sean Mannion, the quarterback's coach for the Green Bay Packers, and he's someone I'd pay attention to. And he's not someone who a lot of fans might know, although he was a backup quarterback for 9 years in the league, but has done, from all indications, a real strong job with the Packers. The Eagles have interviewed him here, and if you just think about the attention that Davis Webb's getting in Denver, very similar profile. A matter of fact, similar profile to Kellen Moore at one point when Kellen Moore became the OC for the Cowboys, where you go straight from backup quarterback to coaching, don't have a long runway there to become an OC. Now, he lacks play calling experience, and I think that's the big question here at this point, is you can go with the established play caller, which Matt Nagy is, even though he didn't do it in Kansas City. He's obviously done it in the past, former head coach, longtime offensive coordinator, or you can go with the up-and-coming coach at this point. And I think at the start of the search, the idea was the Eagles were going to go with that established play caller because it's different from what Kevin Petula was. It's different from what Brian Johnson was in 2023. I think that's evolved as this has gone on, and you've seen them be more open to. Now, you mentioned Declan Doyle over the weekend. If we had this conversation, I probably would have said he'd be the front runner. Since then, it sounds like he'll go back to the Bears. But that's just an example of how they're more interested in the offensive ideas, the offensive backgrounds, and I think that's what the vision is now. My understanding is they're offering autonomy over the offense, or at least they were initially. That'll probably depend on who the hire is. But so I mentioned Sean Mannion. I mentioned Matt Nagy. Another name you hear here is Jim Bob Cooter, who's the offensive coordinator for the Colts. He was with the Eagles in 2021 as an offensive assistant. He worked with Nick Sirianni in Kansas City, so there's some background there. I know Frank Smith's a name that has come up as well. But I think the 2 names I would really pay attention to, or the 3 I would say, are Sean Mannion. There's Matt Nagy, and then there's Jim Bob Cooter. And there's always the chance of like a door number 3, someone we're not talking about emerging late in the process.
Sean Mannion is such a fun name. Kevin Stefanski told me once that the moment that Sean Mannion retired, he'd want him to be his quarterback's coach. Like the moment that it happened. And so he worked with Sean for, I think, 2 years, maybe even a year. With the Vikings when Sean was the backup quarterback there. And so even when he was a player, there was an understanding from everybody that like, oh, he'll be a really good coach the moment that he decides to coach. He did. He's the quarterback's coach of the Packers already. You just said he's already in like the top 2 options to potentially be the offensive coordinator for the Eagles. And so based on what I had heard about him as just a coaching prospect, that should not be surprising. The Packers offense is very different than the Eagles offense, right? I mean, just the amount of under center play action that we see. And I think that can be a good thing. And I think that's going to be the question with this, right? It's that, okay, how can you fold in some ideas that maybe are more popular around the league that don't necessarily fall in line with who the Eagles are? The amount of motion that the Packers use, the amount of under center play action the Packers use, the ways they try to access the middle of the field, just that the set of ideas on offense is very different. And I think that can be a good thing if you find the right middle ground between them. And that's honestly why I find Jim Bob Cooter such an interesting candidate for something like this, because I think what Shane has done so well, he comes from the same schematic background as Nick Sirianni does. But if you look at what the Colts offense is, he has iterated on a lot of those ideas and evolved a lot of those ideas. And so the fact that Jim Bob Cooter watched that process happen, where you're taking the 2022 Eagles offense and then building it into what the 2025 Colts offense is, sharing the same language and understanding that sort of path forward, that is intriguing to me. Like, that is why somebody like Jim Bob Cooter, in my mind, could make sense for something like this.
It's a valid point. And I personally think, and I know there'll be people who might disagree, that Jalen Hurts deserves more credit. I mean, look, I'm not in the meeting rooms, but conversations I've had with Jalen have indicated that he wants to grow. He wants to evolve. He doesn't want to be the same quarter. You know, he grew from Alabama to Oklahoma. He grew from his rookie year, the 2022. And now he has an idea of what might fit him best, but I think he might be more open to some concepts than the reputation might be. So yeah, I do think this offense must evolve. I think there are things that they can incorporate, league trends that would be better. I think the big thing, and this goes back to watching that Rams Seahawks game the other day, and Tom Brady says on the telecast, a good coordinator gets his quarterbacks layups. And when you watch the Eagles offense, especially this past year, there just weren't enough layups. Everything seemed like a chore to move down the field. And I think that what would serve and that might not be on Patullo, that might be on a lot of different factors. But what the Eagles need to do better is get those high percentage passes, get their receivers the ball in space, have I don't know if A.J. Brown's going to be here, but Devontae Smith, a chance to get yards after the catch. That's going to be critical for the Eagles. So watching what those trends are and figuring out how to maximize them. And look, this was the conversation when they hired Kellen Moore. And it kind of started that way and then evolved into a Saquon Barkley run-first offense, and you do what you have to do to win. But the reality is the Eagles aren't paying A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith to be decoys in the offense. You need to maximize the talent, and that's what the Eagles haven't done well enough.
There are so many situations in the NFL that could only happen to the Philadelphia Eagles, just for so many different reasons. And this is one of them, where you could imagine, again, they find the right guy. Jim Bob Cooter, Sean Mannion, maybe even Matt Nagy is right for the job. He gets you over the exact same sort of bar that Kellen Moore did. This team wins 13 games next year. They look like an absolute monster by the time we get to the playoffs, and they're in another Super Bowl. You could also see them hiring the wrong guy and everyone getting fired at the end of next year. And so just the breadth of outcomes that always feels like it's associated with this team is a unique proposition in the NFL. And I feel like this offensive coordinator search is no different.
You're absolutely right. That's like those are the stakes of this right now. And it might seem preposterous to discuss because Nick Sirianni, I mean, less than a year ago at this point, almost 365 days ago, was in New Orleans holding up the Lombardi Trophy. But time moves quickly in the NFL, and you've seen this in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson. That the expectation is that you'll compete every year for a championship, and that regression's not really permitted, especially when you have this type of talent. So, look, Nick Sirianni has a better winning percentage than any coach in the NFL. Like, that's a fact. 5 years, 5 playoff appearances, 2 Super Bowl appearances, 1 Super Bowl. Like, you can't argue with his resume. But the Eagles are in win now mode, and they need to figure out a way to maximize 2026. And that's why this search is so fascinating, because if you take an unknown, maybe that coach develops 2-3 years in, I'm down the line into an outstanding coordinator, that doesn't do the Eagles any good next year. They need to figure out how to maximize 2026.
Always a good time in Philadelphia. Zach Berman, sincerely appreciate the time, sir. Appreciate your insight. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, that's all we got for today. Thanks to Dave. Thanks to Derrik. Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Zach Berman. That is all we've got for this week. The next time you hear from us, we will be in San Francisco for the Super Bowl. We got a little Senior Bowl recap coming your way on Monday. Just a Monday version of Building the Beast because we got a lot of Super Bowl stuff coming your way for the rest of the week. We got a full slate of shows coming to your guys' way from San Francisco. We're talking to both beat writers on Tuesday, which I'm very much looking forward to. Always great to chat with Chad Graff and Michael Sean Dugar. And then a couple other Super Bowl specific shows in the middle of the week, followed by our big old Super Bowl preview on Friday. We're going to be having a ton of video specific stuff that's going to be hitting the YouTube channel that we're going to be working on over the course of the week. Some of it will be coming out in the short term. Some will be coming out over the next month or so, but we've got a lot of fun discussions on tap with some folks on Radio Row. The other exciting thing I'm really looking forward to next week, Derrik pays off the wins pool bet on Radio Row. And so that is going to be a very fun day as we sit there with Derrik looking like an idiot in front of all the people that we work with. For now, that is all we've got. Sincerely appreciate you guys listening. We'll talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching. Follow The Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube.